So I just want to begin by saying that when you started working at the St. Thomas More Catholic Newman Center
Mhm.
at the University of Arizona in Tucson, um, you're working with this group of college students, um, this specific age group at this specific point in their lives. What was your approach in responding and reaching out to these college students?
I think that, so I'm a Dominican friar, of the Western Dominican province, and our province for many years has always had a commitment to campus ministry or university chaplaincy, whichever you prefer. And I think that it's a very important time in young people's lives. I remember years ago when I was studying psychology, I remember Eric Erickson's different stages of development. And I remember one of his stages was, I think it was the one that followed right after high school. I think high school was always oftentimes about that identity formation. But then the stage that follows after that is 18 to 28, and that's all about intimacy versus isolation. And he postulated that when people head to college, particularly, or to maybe trade school or working right away, what can happen sometimes is that they charge into it with whatever identity that they formed in high school. So whatever that identity is, they charge into the next level of their life. And then if they can integrate through their college years, kind of what they're learning in the classroom, what they're experiencing outside of the classroom. If somehow they can integrate those things in a healthy way, they achieve intimacy, which comes from a word that means self-acceptance or acceptance. But if they don't, they isolate. And that has totally been my experience of university ministry. Like you see young people, maybe they were super involved, maybe in their faith or in a number of programs in high school. And sometimes they come to college and it's like this larger atmosphere. It's like an ocean of wider experiences, and they get really challenged, because everybody that you've ever known is um, challenging your beliefs. And I remember, like when I was a college student, I remember what was that? I think the course was called Civ, and it was like one of these introductory courses like humanity. And it's one where you hear, oh, well, that Adam and Eve story. Well, that's not quite how it happened. And then, young people can be absolutely traumatized by that because when you're sometimes depending on your level of religious catechesis, whether you're a Catholic, Christian, or whatever, um, it all depends on how much you continued that. And oftentimes people kind of remember the big things, but not always the other things. And so they come into college and all of a sudden they get challenged, and if they don't know how to respond to that, they can kind of pull back. But I just say thanks be to God for university work, because it respects the fact that young people are in institutes of higher learning. It respects that they're in a period of discernment, trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives professionally, but it also is going to say that they're going to grow in terms of their own human development and spiritual development. And I think what I really enjoy is to be able to say that your human development, your professional development, your personal development, and your spiritual development can all work together. And I think I just love and deeply enjoy that process. When I was first ordained, I worked at St. Dominic's in San Francisco, and it was kind of this inner city parish, but inner city in a very interesting way. I don't know if you're familiar with San Francisco, but the district, it was called the Western Addition. And so on the one level, when I was there, like you had kind of a more depressed community right up against a very opulent community. And then you have this gigantic fourth century French Gothic church with the buttresses right there, right in the midst of all this. And it's this incredible intersection of just kind of sort of old San Francisco money and kind of young adults that are kind of yuppified, and then people just kind of transitioning, but also kind of a poorer community. And in our parish, like we had a community service department. Was one of the Dominican sisters who basically had an outreach program. Just it was kind of like a day program because she felt like so many people have programs for people, homeless people for breakfast, but also for dinner, but nothing really during the day. So she established this drop-in center. So the first experience of that parish as a newly ordained priest was such, I think it was so valuable for me because I felt like I went through tons of experiences that really stretched me. And then after that excitement of 3 years, then I went to Stanford University because the Dominicans we were starting on, uh, you know, to do campus ministry there, and that was incredible. So I was there for 6 years. So that was really kind of a tremendous experience of campus ministry. And of course, Stanford, this Ivy League school, but yet even in Ivy League schools, you have human beings, students that are trying to again, like I was saying, negotiate that path of just whatever identity was formed in high school, bringing that into the wider ocean of college and saying, okay, so now what do I do with this? What do I do with the fact that I'm trying to figure out or establish what I want to do for my career? But then also, I mean, how do I grow as a person? I mean, people figuring out what dating means or what it doesn't mean. What does it mean to be involved in various student organizations? What does it mean to kind of grow consciousness in different ways? What does it mean to have consciousness challenged? And so for me, what I most enjoy about working with college students is just being a part of that journey. I mean, they are on this massive journey in an institute of higher learning where their intellects are being challenged, but not just their intellects, their their person, their personality, their beliefs, and it's just wonderful to be able to kind of accompany people on that journey and to be able to say that your faith can be a part of that journey. Faith can stand the scrutiny of intellectual questions and even doubts. To be able to kind of find its place in the midst of all that. So that's my long, hopefully not too convoluted response to your first question.
No, that's perfect. And what got me thinking was, you mentioned kind of your experience, right? Uh, is there anything that, looking back now, an approach you made in terms of trying to speak to these students in responding to them, that you kind of look back now and you
Yeah,
realize like that was not the best approach? Because I've always heard, there's always this need to reach out to uh, um, pull in this kind of age group where people are kind of somewhat leaving, the
yeah.
churches. But is there anything that you kind of realize like that probably isn't a good approach for for us to take?
I think the thing that I realized, Alexander, is that I had a very good mentor when I was at Stanford. I was the associate priest, and he was pastor, so he had tons of years of campus ministry. I think one of the things I really saw that was extremely important was this whole idea of a ministry of presence. Because at Stanford University, it's very interesting because the school has a big budget, and so we realized very very quickly that we're not going to be able to compete with kind of their social programs. But what we had to do was to offer something different. And I think the thing that I really realized working with my mentor, Father Patrick LaBelle, was the importance of just being able to be of being present and available. I think the other thing was that so oftentimes as Catholics, people are they're catechized in a particular way, but people can have different sort of expressions of their Catholicism. I mean, maybe people grew up, you know, um, more conservative or more traditional or more moderate or more progressive. And I grew up, more traditional. But the thing I learned over the years was I kind of have become more moderate because I believe that you have to be able to kind of have your roots and know where you come from. You can't get rid of that, but you can't be so mired down that blocks your ability, I think, to be open. And so I think the thing that I discovered very very quickly was that you have to be present to people and to kind of see what they need. The church provides, Catholic Church provides, I mean, we have our seven sacraments, and we have um, a whole approach for reading scripture and prayer and morality. So the church supplies lots of things already. But I think the whole thing is being able to say, with all the things that the church offers so freely and beautifully, um, how can these things be helpful to people? So I think the thing that I realized quickly is that you can't be you have to discover what works, and sometimes that's trial and error, you know. And I think that in a lot of the beginning, well, you know, you discover, well, sometimes, oh, is it a particular topic for a retreat, or certain classes that you offer. It's And that being in a new place, you have to kind of get a sense of the environment. And then as you get a sense of the environment, it helps you to be able to present things that are going to be helpful. The other thing I think for me that has been absolutely um, key to campus work is appointments. So over programs are good and necessary, but having availability, because I find that so many people, especially students, once they know that you are an approachable person, a safe person, they come. And then it's always great because they try to, oh, well, Father, I'm going to shock you with this or that or the other, and you're just saying, well, I'm waiting to be shocked. You know what I mean? And I think that half the battle is having an open mind and open heart and trying to see where they are. So I think that the thing that I discovered very, very quickly was that you have to just kind of learn the environment. You bring who you are into that environment, and of course, like with daily mass and confessions, and and some of the things that we bring as Catholics. Well, yeah, you have those offerings, but within those offerings, getting a sense of what it is that people need and what becomes effective. Personally, that's what my mentor taught me, and personally, that's what I've learned, and that's kind of what I've used to kind of grow and develop any sort of program, is to kind of say, well, you go in and say, well, you need time to discover what's needed, and then go from there.
And I know college by its nature, right? There's I'm assuming a 4-year cycle, right, where they just kind of come in after 4 years to graduate, another 4 years of different crop of students. But have you seen yourself like a general or common uh, issue that all these students kind of need assistance with or approach you with?
Oh,
Like, is there something that you're like,
yeah.
even though it's different group of students, but they're always seem to be asking for
Yes.
XYZ?
Yes. I think identity is a huge thing. And that's why I said it's been interesting, like that Erickson, I think, was on to something, because whatever the identity that was formed in high school, when you get in college, in that wider pool, it gets challenged. Who am I? Am I what I study? Am I my grades? Am I the fraternity or sorority that I belong to, or the student org that I belong to? Am I, when I come to the Newman Center, and I, you know, um, bubble to the top as leader, am I that leader? So I think that really the thing that I've discovered is it really is a lot of it is really identity, and how do all these other aspects of, intellectual life and personal life and spiritual life, how do those things sort of impact who I am? So I think that's pretty universal, because you said, well, I think the traditional, most students, it is 4 years, but some of them they go for 5 years, and then some, oftentimes after 4 years, they might at Stanford and UCSD, University of California San Diego, and now at U of A. A lot of universities have this 1-year master thing. So sometimes students will, after 4 years, they do kind of the 1-year master thing, and then sometimes 1 year it becomes, a 4-year master, sometimes, and PhD. Sometimes others of them are ready to launch and to go into the working force. And sometimes after 4 years, students, maybe they've stretched the muscles and they're not sure what they want to do. So sometimes they take like a gap year after that. So again, for me, I think that so much of what I've discovered and see is it's identity. I mean, who am I, and how in this Institute of Higher Learning and Higher Experience, I mean, how does that help me to kind of form and shape that? And then push off from that into whatever I'm supposed to be doing with my life.
So, in those general instances, are you having conversations with them, one-on-one conversations with them? Are you kind of referring them to specific kind of programs? Are you like, what's like generally what's the kind of go-to for that type of
Yeah. So one of the things
question?
I really appreciated, being involved in university work for most of my ministry as a priest is really also partnering with college student services, because they have CAPS, which is kind of like the counseling service on campus. And I remember when I was at Stanford and at University of California, San Diego, and now here at U of A, I've always reached out to those just to discover who those folks are. Because sometimes I find in working with students, sometimes you bump up against, various mental health issues sometimes. And the thing of it is that I try to stay more in the lane of kind of, the spiritual and kind of pastoral counseling. I like to kind of stay more in that lane. And then but I also like to be able to know what's available in terms of counseling service, academic services, career services, health services on the campus, so that, you can be able to refer. But the thing that's been really beautiful that I've noticed over years is that it's really neat to be able to work in conjunction with these services and to really see ourselves as a part of that team of people working with students. So you have to see ourselves as a part of that college student services, but just maybe more particular toward the spiritual realm. And it's been wonderful because in my years and in the reach out, when you have that great relationship with university officials, they also reach out to you. And I've had a lot of that too. So I think that that's really been a very, very, very valuable relationship and tool.
And just kind of touching base on all sides of this, you know, a lot of students are in different parts of their spiritual journey.
Mhm.
And so, how do you kind of detect or kind of handle, a person who's never really been immersed in the Christian faith
Yeah,
versus someone who's kind of, they may declare themselves to be Christian from birth, kind of gone
yeah,
through, let's say,
yeah.
sacraments and all that, but at a certain point they're questioning or doubting. Like, how do you kind of, you know, deal with those two kind of ends of the spectrum?
No, that's an excellent question. But the thing that I ascribe to Timothy Ratcliffe, he's a English Dominican, actually just he became a cardinal. So he actually was one of the people that kind of voted on this new pope that we have. But he is a wonderful, wonderful speaker. And I remember I was never prouder to be a Dominican friar. That's what I am, a Dominican friar. Um, I forget I think it was in the 2000s. He wrote a book called "What's the Point of Being a Christian?" And he said, and the reason why he said he wrote the book was, he said, because he had so many people asking him that question. So he said, "Oh, this is probably a good question to reflect on." And as Dominican friars, we've always had an intellectual tradition that's a part of our legacy as Dominicans. Of course, Thomas Aquinas being, probably would be one of our most famous people. You know, but one of the things he said was he took a selection from the Gospel of John, the raising of Lazarus, and he took 3 lines from that, and he developed this talk that was just out of sight. And basically, one of the things that he said was, he said, he said, wherever people were, he said, for Christ, that's where the journey began. And I've kind of adopted that as important to me. So I don't care. I mean, we're the Catholic community here, and so that's our primary audience. But what's so wonderful here, Alexander, is that many of our students are maybe they have non-Catholic roommates or maybe not Christian roommates, but sometimes people are looking for social opportunities, or sometimes they're wondering, well, where do you go on Wednesday nights, like new nights? And so sometimes they'll bring their roommates or whatever. And then, of course, we're not, checking like their Catholic card at the door. No, they just come, and they just come, and they're a part of dinner or whatever the programs are. And what happens sometimes is sometimes a student will say, "Well, hey, Father, can I come and see you?" And so we always say yes, because I'm not interested in, you know, what I'm most concerned about is whatever that student wants to talk about. And if I have anything to offer, well, then I can offer that. If not, then I try to be able to kind of refer. But I always want people to know that we're approachable. So to your question, I really want to quote that thing, wherever person is, that's where the journey begins. And I remember years ago, I remember thinking about this question. I used to think I wasn't yet ordained, but I remember we were in some sort of class. I remember thinking once that there's a difference between questions of religion, so like Catholic answers or other answers, and questions of faith. And what I mean by faith is the experience of having faith. And the thing that I learned and have learned in my priesthood is that if you get those questions mixed up, so for instance, a student is just saying, I don't know what I believe. That's a question of faith, not of religion. And if I then start to sort of rattle off, all the things I believe, well, then I'm not listening to them. And what I find sometimes, like when people come in and they ask that question, maybe if it's a person who doesn't have religion or whatever, I'll say, oh, well, something brought you in here. So, I mean, so what do you find the things that are important to you? I always try to find some more elemental level of belief, and then to try to see if that can be a starting point. You know what I mean? So, and then the whole conversation will just be around that elemental part. And then if people want to keep coming back and asking me questions, then maybe we move into other things. But I think that's a really important thing. So 2 points: where a person is, that's where the journey begins. I think that's really important to me. And again, this whole notion of being able to say that I find whenever I'm in a conversation with a person, I'm going, what my discernment is this person asking me a question of faith or a question of religion? And I try to listen so I don't get those questions wrong.
No, that's very I think that is very important. And kind of in the same line, right? I've noticed in your homilies, right? You're
Hmm.
speaking on the lectionary readings,
Hmm.
but you always uh, gear it towards students, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the ratings is, even though I may have kind of more generic kind of um, topic for, let's say, adults or whatever, you always kind of hone it in on students.
Yeah.
Is that difficult for you? Kind of just kind of for every lectional reading, kind of making sure it reaches your targeted audience of college students.
Yeah. I feel what's so interesting about that is it's a great observation, and I appreciate you observing that. Um, I think we have to say college students aren't easy to reach, right? So you have to be able to kind of break things down. So I don't think it's dumbing it down. It's because college students are not easy to reach. And so I think somehow I try to listen through my week and through my experience up to the things that I'm hearing. And so I try to be able to say, okay, well, what there's always a deep message in the readings, but how do you break it open in a way that it can be intelligible to students' experience? But yet I find sometimes that insofar as it's intelligible to students' experiences, that it also reaches some of the adult community too, which is because they're there too, but it's predominantly students. So I think it's important. So I always they always say that it's harder to preach a shorter homily than a longer homily because you have to really kind of hone it down. So I'm always thinking, all right, well, what have I heard in my appointments this week, or what's the climate in X, Y, and Z, and then I try to be able to say whatever the message is. I want to be able to preach that message, clearly, but I also want to be able to kind of preach it in a way that it's going to enter the minds and hopefully the hearts of these college students.
Do you have any stories? And I guess nothing specific, but do you have any stories of in your earlier years of reaching out to students? They've graduated, gone on with their lives, but somehow you kind of hear back from them, you touch
Oh
base
yeah.
with them. Like, has anything surprised you in terms of like what they say they learn from you, from even hearing back from someone who you thought probably wasn't going to
Yeah.
necessarily, continue in this faith journey? Like, is there anything that kind of stands out?
There's so many stories like that. I remember um, after being at Stanford, I was at Stanford for 6 years, and then I moved to San Diego, and I went to San Diego like to actually study counseling. I wanted to just, we had like a lot of pastoral counseling courses, so I just wanted to study counseling just to be able to understand just like a little bit more. So I enrolled I was accepted to USD, University of San Diego, and so I studied counseling there for a year, and then I got appointed to be like the director of the Newman Center at the University of California, San Diego. And what was very interesting was I remember in that first year, I got this email, and I remember recognizing like the last name. So this guy was on the Stanford's men's basketball team. And I remember he used to come to mass. He'd kind of come in and um, in the 4 years I was there, like we never sat down. I'd see him go by and I'd say hi, and he'd say hi, and that was kind of it. But it was the wildest thing. He sent me this email, and it began with just like a just just kind of some pleasantries. But then well, he said recently I got engaged. He said, and when I was thinking about who I wanted to preside at the ceremony, I thought of you. And then I was like, hmm. I thought at first I was thinking before I read on, well, we never really talked. Why? But then he read on and he said, although we never really talked, he said, I felt like whenever you preached, he said, like you were speaking to me. He said you had a way of getting inside of my mind, and and my emotions and my experience. He said that I deeply experienced. He said, and though I never ever told you that, he said that was something that I really, really deeply appreciated, and that I carried with me, and so it was wild, and so of course, I wrote right back and said yes, I would do the wedding. And then, so what was really funny about the whole story was that I ended up doing their marriage preparation, kind of remotely, because they were, in Utah and I was in San Diego. But it was wonderful just getting to know them that way. And then I ended up doing their wedding, and so we have a wonderful relationship. But it was one of those things that how would I have ever known back then that, because you run across people all the time, and there were definitely students that were, when I was at Stanford, that were a part of kind of like the ministry team that I knew, and that I've since done their weddings, and baptized their children, and I keep in touch with, but I remember that was just such an interesting experience that just happened like that. I also remember another story. I remember when I first got to Stanford, I was moving into my office, and it's up on this third floor. The third floor of the old Union was where kind of the different faiths had their offices. I remember I'm new, moving in, just kind of in my civvies, and this student came upstairs, and she just seemed like she was just kind of out of sorts. And so I think she was looking for the Catholic community, and so I said, "Oh, hello, can I help you?" And I identified who I was, and she said, so I said, well, are you okay? Come in. So she comes in, sits down, breaks down, because I guess she was from, everybody, she was from El Paso, and she was a grad student in law, and she just was not having she just moved there. She just was not having a great few days, and someone stole her bike, and so she just broke down in the office. And I just listened to her, and then as things went on. But I remember, um, 3 years later, when she graduated from law school, she was just a different person. You know what I mean? But I was just remembering, just I didn't do anything. I just happened to be there. And again, there's just so many other stories. What's beautiful, one of the ways that I find that I really keep a lot in touch with students is we have a program called like student ministry. So it's like, so we choose about anywhere from 16 to 18 students, and I always like to be kind of a diverse team. And what they do is they then they try coordinate 5 committees. So community life is the committee all about how to build community life. Liturgy, all about getting involved in the ministry. Faith formation, what are the questions that the student have? Social justice, how do we take the things that we hear in the gospel and live those things out? And outreach, how do we get students from campus connected to us and vice versa? So every year for like a lot of years, I've worked with this team of students, and our student ministry program has 3 goals. The first goal of the program is self-knowledge, you know. The second goal of the program is faith formation, because I find that, and that's kind of two-pronged. I find some students have like a lot of really amazing book knowledge of the faith, but no discipleship. You know what I mean? You know, other people have all this chutzpah for discipleship, but not, but like not a lot of knowledge. And so that's why the second goal of student ministry is faith formation, and only the third goal is service. And these 16 to 18 students, they commit to a year. We work together for these programs. But I always say to the students, first and foremost, that student ministry is first and foremost a formative experience in those 3 areas that involves doing, as opposed to a doing experience that involves formation. And I can't tell you, Alexander, I've done this for like a lot of years, and talk about connections with students. You watch them grow over 4 years or 3 years or 2 years, however long they're part of the program, while also being full-time students. And then after the fact, they talk about how these skills and these aspects of student ministry have stayed with them in their life and help them to find, their careers and their spouses. And it's always such a joy to me that when I'm performing these weddings and baptizing these babies, that the faith and their experience of it is something that lives in them, because they see it as a formative experience and helpful to their life. You know what I mean? And so that's probably like one of that program is something that I'm really proud of. And it was something that you talk about development. At Stanford, just kind of it was observing and learning, and then kind of developing, and then kind of honing it a little bit more at UCSD, because I was at University of California for 14 years, so that's a lot of time to go through different things. And then now here at U of A, I've just completed my 9th year here, only to start my 10th. So it's as you can tell, I love university work, and I love working with students. Because I think they keep you on your toes, and but it's also nice to be able to help them to know that, kind of in a world that can sometimes is a beautiful world, but that can be so cynical and polarized. And how in the heck do you kind of keep communicating and keep growing, and not just dig a hole and want to dive in, and to be able to say that your faith isn't a happy pill that you take, but it can be a light that can kind of guide you and help you navigate different situations. And I love being a part of that. I mean, fully using your mind, you know, but fully using your heart, and fully using your skills. I mean, that's what it means to be a Christian, to be fully alive. That's what God intends. So.
Very powerful. Very powerful to hear kind of the impact across all
No, it's
these.
wonderful. Yeah, to
Yeah.
me, and yeah.
Let me try to sum up or wrap up by asking the last 3 questions. I
Sure.
ask all my guests, and I'm not sure if you heard previous one, but I'll ask just very briefly, right? The first is, what is one scripture verse or part of the Bible that really resonates with you, and why?
Gosh, too many. But the one, and I'm not remembering like the citation right off the top of my head right now, but it's the story of the rich young man from the Gospel of Mark. Yeah, because it's also in the other Gospels. But the rich young man, good teacher, what must I do to inherit everlasting life? And Jesus says, well, why do you call me good? Only God is good. The commandments. And the guy says, well, yeah, I've kept those. And then only in Mark's gospel it says, and Jesus looks at him with love and says, if you want to be perfect. And yet when he says perfect, he's talking about perfection, not from the Greek sense, the apex, but he's talking about perfection from the Hebrew, the biblical sense, the covenant. So perfection in the sense of walking with God, not reaching the apex. He says, if you want to be perfect, leave everything and follow me. And then we hear his face falls because he has so many possessions. And then Jesus says to the crowd, well, how hard it is for those who have much to enter the kingdom of heaven. And then it's like a Greek chorus, and they're amazed. And then so he says it again. And then finally he says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, the opening of a city, than for one who has a lot to enter. And then the apostles say, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus says, well, For human beings, it's impossible, but not for God. And then Peter, good old Peter, says, "Look, we left everything to follow you." And I loved, and Jesus looks at him with love again and says, "There's no one who's left everything really. Who isn't going to receive everything? Houses, homes, brothers, sisters, and persecutions, but in the end, life." I love that story because it's such tenderness. A rich young person. This is what college work. These are the questions that you get asked. What more must I do? And yet, when they get the answer, sometimes they could be totally, sort of befuddled by that. But to have that ability, Jesus just kind of stays with them and says, "No, but it isn't all about you. God has to also be a part of this process." So that's my favorite. So it's the Gospel of Mark, the story of the rich young man. I'd have to look up the citation. No.
No, I'm sure we can look it up in
Well, yeah,
online.
you'll find it quickly. Yeah, yeah, from
Yeah.
Mark's Gospel. Yeah.
The second question is, what is one word or couple of words that you would like God to use in describing you?
Present and helpful.
And the last question is there anything we can help promote or you would like others to support?
Uh, well, I think university work is always great. Campus ministry, I think that's really great. Next year, this Newman Center is going to be celebrating a centennial. I can't believe it, 100 years. So 100 years of this place reaching out to students and caring for them and their journey. And so that's going to be we're going to be celebrating that. So the big weekend is going to be the last weekend of April of 26. But the really all calendar year, academic year 25, 26, we'll be doing it. But then we're also going to be doing it for the whole calendar year of 26, just having little celebrations. So I just think that two things. So I think that's more commercial, but I think but I think the bigger thing is just the value of campus work. So college students are worried about going to college, um, there is something called campus ministry that, and I encourage people to get involved in it. I think it's very, very helpful. So that's what I'd say.